Thank you. Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradhari Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradhari Yashodanandana Brajajana Ranjana Yashodanandana Brajajana Ranjana Jamuna Tira Vanachari Jamuna Tira Vanachari Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradhari Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradhari Yashodanandana Brajajana Ranjana Yashodanandana Brajajana Ranjana Jamuna Tira Vanachari Jamuna Tira Vanachari Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Jayam Vishnupad Paramahamsa Parvajagacharya Ashtottara Shata Shri Srimad Srila Abhay Chanararanda Bhakti Vedanta Swami Maharaj Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai Ananta Koti Vaishnava Vrinda Ki Jai Namacharya Srila Thakur Haridas Ki Jai Prem Se Kaho Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasari Gaur Bhakta Vrinda Ki Jai Shri Shri Radha Krishna Gopa Gopinath Shyam Kunda Radha Kunda Giri Govardhan Ki Jai Vrindavan Dham Ki Jai Navadip Mayapur Dham Ki Jai Ganga Devi Ki Jai Yamuna Mai Ki Jai Bhakti Devi Ki Jai Tulsi Rani Ki Jai Samaveta Bhakta Vrinda Ki Jai Shri Harinama Sankirtana Ki Jai Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam Ki Jai ISKCON PBT Samsthapak Acharya Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai Go Premanande. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to Sri Sri Guru and Gauranga. Jai Srila Prabhupada. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prishtaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swaminiti Namane. Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharane Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Pashtati Deshatharane. Om Agyanatimirandhasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namam Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Sthapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamahyam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guroho Shri Yuta Kamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sagana Raghunathan Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadhutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padam Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakhan Vitamscha He Krishna Karuna Sindho Dinabandho Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanusute Devi Pranamami Hare Priye Namo Mahavalanyaya Krishna Prema Pradayate Krishnaya Krishna Chaitanya Namne Gaura Tvishe Namaha Vanchakalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya Evacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namah Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Vasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Madgavira Vigopala Swikuryat Kripaya Yadi Tadaivasam Payaha Pitwa Hrishyeyustat Priyajanaha. We are continuing with our English reading from Srila Prabhupada Lilamrita by Satsarup Das Goswami, and we're on the chapter entitled How Shall I Serve You? Chapter 4 of the first volume of the Lilamrita. We're on page 103 in this particular edition, which was printed in November of 2017. So we're at Radha Kund in Kartik and Vrindavan. And Srila Prabhupada is visiting there from Mumbai, and he's spoken with Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, and he was hearing from his spiritual master, and we're on the banks of Radha Kund. So, I'll resume on page 103. Having heard of his spiritual master's stay here, Abhay, bringing his son with him, had traveled from Mumbai just to have darshan of his spiritual master. To see Srila Bhaktisiddhanta was always an occasion for jubilation, but to see him in Vrindavan was an added perfection. This meeting with his beloved guide and friend was different from the time in 1932 when Abhay had seen him on the Vrindavan Parikrama. Now, Abhay was no longer sitting anonymously in the back of the room. Now he was a bona fide disciple, recognized as the Kavi, who had written the praiseworthy poem and essay, the young man who listened well, the devotee who had helped the Allahabad Mutt and who had established the Mutt in Mumbai. Already on this visit, Abhay had had occasion to be alone with his spiritual master, who had remembered Abhay's son and presented him with a small bandhi jacket. Now, as they walked together alone on the bank of Radha Kunda, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati turned and spoke confidentially to Abhay. There had been some quarreling amongst his leading disciples in Kolkata, he said, and this distressed him very much. Even now, in Vrindavan, it weighed heavily on his mind. Some of his disciples had been fighting over who would use various rooms and facilities at the Gaudiya Mutt headquarters in Kolkata. These devotees were all members of the same Mutt, and the building was for propagating Krishna consciousness under the leadership of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati. Yet even in their spiritual master's presence, they were quarreling. Brahmanas and Vaishnavas were supposed to be free from envy of any creature, what to speak of envy of one another. If they were to fight now, what would they do after their spiritual master passed away? Abhay had no part in these matters and did not even know the details of who was involved. But as he listened to his spiritual master, he also became distressed. Deeply concerned, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati said to Abhay, Agun jwalbe, there will be fire. One day there would be fire in the Kolkata Gaudiya Mutt, and that fire of party interests would spread and destroy. Abhay heard, but did not know what to make of it. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta had fought so long and boldly to establish that anyone of any birth could be elevated to become a Brahmana, a sannyasi, or a Vaishnava. But if his followers became contaminated by a little wealth and the desire for prestige, thereby showing themselves to be still low-class men despite their training and purification, then his mission would be disrupted. If in the name of religion they became attached to ease, position, and prestige, it could only mean that they had failed to grasp the teachings of their spiritual master. Srila Prabhupada, this is him recalling. He was lamenting that these men are simply after the stones and bricks of the building. He condemned. He was very, very sorry. When we were living in a rented house, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta said, if we could collect 200 or 300 rupees, we were living very nicely at Ultadanga. We were happier then. But since we have been given this marble palace, in Baghbazar, there is friction between our men. Who will occupy this room? Who will occupy that room? Who will be the proprietor of this room? Everyone is planning in different ways. It would be better to take the marble from the walls and secure money. If I could do this and print books, that would be better. Abhay felt his spiritual master speaking to him in urgency, as if asking him for help or warning him to avert a disaster. But what could he do? Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati then said directly to Abhay, Amar ichha chilo kichu bai karan. I had a desire to print some books. If you ever get money, print books. Standing by Radhakunda and beholding his spiritual master, Abhay felt the words deeply enter his own life. If you ever get money, print books. There's so much to talk about just in this short passage that we've read. So many things that are there, and we will see them in our own lives. Maybe we've already seen them. As much as we depend on God brothers and other devotees, these are the persons who, from time to time, also drive us crazy. It's not so easy to deal with God brothers all the time. And Srila Prabhupada had ample experience. His God brothers were not only not encouraging him in his service, they were directly opposing him, working against him in his service. And Srila Prabhupada's only interest was to fulfill the direct instruction he had received from Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, which we've heard here. If you ever get money, print books. So this was 1935, just about a year before Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, not even a year, maybe not even 6 months later, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur had left this world. Srila Prabhupada told us that Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur was disappointed with his disciples on account of this: party spirit, personal ambition, desire, non-devotional desires for profit, adoration, distinction. These are the weeds that choke our devotional creeper. Bhakti lata. The cultivation of bhakti is compared to growing some lata. And that lata can be choked by so many weeds that are not part of the garden. And in the same way, our devotional creeper can be suffocated or choked or destroyed even by a proliferation of all these weeds. Weeds in the form of desires for personal profit, personal adoration, personal distinction from others. What to speak of gross material desires in the form of so many sense gratifications, indriya tripti. So this was unfortunately the example set by the leading members of the Gaudiya Math, the leaders. What do you do when the leaders are off? This is a problem. So Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, Srila Prabhupada said, was not pleased with his disciples. He left early for that reason. That's why Srila Prabhupada said he left. He was only, I think, maybe in his 60s, relatively early when he left this world. So, and this is why. So these devotees, they had struggled very hard. The Gaudiya Math in the 1920s especially, and in the 1930s, just about 100 years ago, Gaudiya Math had become so wildly successful that they were able to create huge crowds in Kolkata when they had a big procession for I think it was the opening of that Baghbazar temple, if you've seen it. Big marble, beautiful temple. But there were weeds growing in people's hearts. And if we don't very carefully pull out these weeds that are taken root within our own hearts, those weeds will eventually choke us too. They will choke our devotional creepers. They will choke this institution. It can happen. Don't doubt it. It already did happen. And for those who have been around long enough in ISKCON, Prabhupada's disciples in particular, you've also seen it happen. Even in ISKCON, it's amazing how much ISKCON has replicated the negative aspects of the Gaudiya Math that we used to criticize in the 1970s. And how faithfully we have followed in the same trajectory, and for the same reasons. Prabhupada said in around 1976 or 7, as I recall, personal ambition will spoil everything. This was his warning for the International Society for Krishna Consciousness and every single one of its members, all of us. Personal ambition will destroy everything. So that's what we have to watch out for. It's what happened to the Gaudiya Math. And here we see how much Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur was pained to see his own disciples, leaders on whom he was depending to uphold and exemplify and increase and carry Krishna consciousness into the future for the benefit of successive generations, how much they were absorbed in these petty things. I don't have a big enough position. I'm not getting adequate respect. I want that room. I need that facility. We all have so many things that we need, or that we think we need, or that we want. These are the things that jeopardize our standing in Krishna consciousness. And he said, Algun Jalbe, this place will, the whole thing will burn up. So it so happened, actually. It's amazing how accurately he had predicted the situation. Atma upamyena sarvatra samam pashyati yorjana sukham va yadi va dukkham sa yogi paramo mata. Krishna tells Arjuna in chapter 6, text 32 of Bhagavad Gita, that in my opinion, the best yogi is the person who can empathize, Atma upamyena sarvatra, with everybody. He's able to understand. Tamal Krishna Goswami also, like Srila Prabhupada, he had this ability that within about 2 minutes, he could understand everything about whoever he was dealing with at the moment. He knew what are this person's material desires, how deep are those desires, what's this person's faith, what quality of faith do they have, what are their attachments, what is their background, where are they from, how are they thinking, what's their value system, everything. He could understand this very quickly. And Krishna says this is the symptom of the best yogi. Srila Prabhupada certainly had that ability also. And obviously, it seems from this description, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur also had the same ability to see who these people are, where they're going, what's going to happen. He could predict it very accurately. And it so came to pass. So then he says this, that we were very happy when we were at Ultadanga. There's a very nice essay that has been printed by Bhaktivikas Swami in his wonderful book, Sri Bhaktisiddhanta Vaibhava. It's a comprehensive biography hagiography of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, very carefully researched, very well written, and very informative depiction. So in one of the appendices there, I think he has included this essay that Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur wrote called Putana. Anybody has read this essay? Putana. It's been translated into English. If you haven't read it, I highly suggest that you do that, because there Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur is very keenly describing all the problems that are created as soon as you create an institution, a religious institution. And he was undoubtedly speaking from personal experience. And the really ironic thing is that he wrote that essay at the time that he was dedicating every ounce of his energy, blood, sweat, and tears, to creating a religious institution. And at the same time, he's warning us of what happens once you do so, from personal experience with this Bhag Bazaar. Maybe he wrote it before then, I don't remember exactly what the date is, but the point is that he was very avidly engaged in trying to create and strengthen a religious institution, international institution, which he did in the form of Gaudiya Math. But he could also see very clearly what happens when you do that. Ultadanga was just an apartment they were renting, the brahmacharis and sannyasis of the Gaudiya Math, while they were carrying out their preaching and fundraising, no doubt, efforts to build that big temple. But he says here they were happier then. Why is that? Once you preach successfully, then what's going to happen? You're going to attract people who want to engage their energy and their assets in Krishna consciousness. And what kind of energy and assets do people engage? They have money, they have talents that they can offer, they have service that they're willing to do, they have maybe personnel that they can provide, so many things. These are the things that people are mad after in this material world. Everyone wants dhanam, janam, sundarim, kavitam. These are the list given by Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. They want money, they want the opposite sex, they want the followers, they want learning. And once you preach successfully, all these things are offered by the grace of Daivi Maya, the Lord's energy. And if our hearts are not sufficiently purified, then we misuse these things. That's the problem. And even if you are recognized as a great devotee, if you have maintained material attachments within your hearts, then you will be tested with these things. And then you have to show Krishna, what are you going to do now that there's a crossroads that you've come to? What choice are you going to make? Mahat sevam dwaram ahur vimuktes tamo dwaram yoshitam sangi sangam. That's the archetypical choice. You can go after the saintly association and elevate your consciousness and your activities, or you can go for sense gratification and degrade yourself. This is an eternal choice. Every day we have to make, every moment we have to make this choice. So it's particularly, highlighted when we have a religious institution that we are creating or sustaining or expanding, because these things will all come, all the temptations in the form of karma and gyan, fruit of activities and philosophical or other kinds of speculations. So Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur here, he's actually lamenting that it was better when we had nothing. My god sister Govinda Dasi, which I'm sure you've heard of her, she was Prabhupada's secretary and servant for some time in the early days. She told me that my prayer is that I can always take birth again and again wherever Srila Prabhupada goes, so that I can assist him in his preaching efforts, but only in the beginning. Before the whole thing crystallizes into a big multinational corporate sort of institution. She says, I like it better in the old days, when he was just Swamiji and nobody had any money and there was nothing to fight over. Because when there's a conflict amongst devotees, what is causing that? There's some time, many years ago, I remember that there was a GBC conclusion on this, that we have conflicts among devotees usually over limited resources or miscommunication or a clash of values. These are the three main reasons that they had given. Here we see it's a case of competition over limited resources. Even you have a big Bag Bazaar marble temple, wonderful building, but there's only so many rooms in that building. And maybe some people wanted more than one room. So that's an obvious thing. A little bit less obvious is that, I mean, especially now we have this international, all different people from all different cultures and different languages and different ways of thinking and different mindsets and different assumptions and different expectations. And how do you satisfy everyone? How do you even communicate with everyone? It's so easy to get the wrong idea about someone or to give the wrong impression to someone. That's called miscommunication. And especially it's effective if we only do so through the internet rather than in person. It's very easy to misunderstand people. And then finally there's a clash of values. This is another thing. When we have, as I said, different cultures, different expectations, different mindsets, we have different value systems. And when these things, sometimes they're not always compatible. So that can cause friction. These are the things we have to watch out for. So it can actually get so bad that our own Acharya wishes he never started the thing. It can happen. It did happen. We're reading about it. So this is why we always have to be on guard. As we've heard in the 5th canto from, who is it? Maharaj Rahugana and Jarabharata, the warning is given, never, ever, ever trust your mind. It doesn't matter how much of a devotee you think you are. It doesn't matter how much of a devotee other people think you are. It doesn't even matter if someone that you respect and have full faith in tells you how much of a devotee you are. Still, you can never, ever trust your mind. So what do you have to do instead of trusting your mind? How do you make decisions? What do you do and what do you not do? Krishna tells us this where? In Bhagavad Gita. I'll give you a hint. Chapter 16. Anyone know the verse I'm thinking of? Tasmat chastram pramanam te karya vijanataha. He says, discriminate. Discrimination is a bad word, quite often. But discrimination is also the key word. It's the primary characteristic of madhyama adhikar. For someone who would be advancing out of the neophyte platform onto the intermediate platform of advancement in Krishna consciousness, we have to use our discrimination. And Krishna is telling Arjuna at the end of chapter 16, the way that you do this is by just turning off your mind and following whatever the Shastra says. Tasmat Shastram Pramanam Te Karya Vijanata. Because Acharati Atmana Hashreyas. If you act in such a way that you nourish and encourage and cultivate advancement towards that ideal which is preeminently excellent, if also very difficult to attain, this is what it means, actually, to be an Aryan, to be advancing as a human being even, what to speak of as a devotee of Krishna. So it's very, very important that we follow an objective set of ground rules to govern human behavior, and that is what the Shastra gives. This is why the single most voluminous body of instruction that exists in the Sanskrit language is the Dharma Shastra. Dharma Shastra. Because Dharma Shastra attempts to take the abstract principles of Vedanta philosophy, or even Bhagavata Dharma, and translate them into ground level practical reality. What are you going to do and what are you not going to do? This, Krishna says, has to be determined on the basis of what the Shastra enjoins. And sometimes, believe it or not, the Shastra doesn't give instructions on every conceivable scenario that might arise in our lives. What do we do then? This is a good point that Krishna addresses indirectly in the 11th canto. He says to Uddhava this time, Shruti pratyaksham aitihyam anumana chatushtayam. There are 4 ways that you can understand what's real and what's not real, or what to do and what not to do in this world. 4 ways. 1 you can see with your senses. We know the flaws of that process. Another one you can imagine or speculate in your mind. That's also a flawed process. The best thing is you hear authoritative assertions, but sometimes those aren't clear also, as we're discussing. And so he gives a 4th pramana. What is that? Aitihyam. Aitihyam means shishtachara, the behavior that is exemplary and traditional amongst those persons who are fully trained and fully embody the ideals of Krishna consciousness. In other words, Mahajano yena gata sapantha. Whatever the Mahajanas or whatever your forefathers have done before you, or whatever your spiritual predecessors before you have done, with the understanding that it is dharma, that you should do. That's called shishtachara. So this is another thing to consider here. Anyway, we don't want to get too far afield, but these are just a few comments here on what Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur has told Srila Prabhupada, our Srila Prabhupada, back in 1935 at Radhakund. Now, fast forward several months. This is December 1936. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta was in poor health at Jagannath Puri. Abhay was in Bombay, and he wanted to write his Guru Maharaj a letter. He's a little bit kind upon me, Abhay thought. He'll understand my request. And he began to write, Dear Guru Maharaj, please accept my humble obeisances at your lotus feet. You have got many disciples, and I'm one of them, but they are doing direct service to you. Some of them are brahmacharis, some of them are sannyasis, but I'm a householder. I cannot. Sometimes I give monetary help while I cannot give you direct service. Is there any particular service I can do? 2 weeks later, Abhay received a reply. I'm fully confident that you can explain in English our thoughts and arguments to the people who are not conversant with the language of the other members. It's notable here that even in the 1930s, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur had foreign disciples. There were a couple of German godbrothers of Srila Prabhupada. They were in India, and when World War II broke out, then they were imprisoned by the British because they were seen as a threat, being Germans. So somehow or other they came in contact with Krishna consciousness while there, and they became devotees. So they were some. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur also sent some disciples to places like Burma. Of course, we know he sent Bon Maharaj to London and a few other places overseas. So there were some, but not so many international disciples, and he was very concerned that the teachings of Krishna consciousness should be represented, particularly in the English language, because in those days especially, English was the major language of the predominant world superpower. At that time was the United Kingdom. So when, he said to communicate our thoughts and our ideals to those who are not conversant with the Indian languages. This will do much good to yourself as well as to your audience. I have every hope that you can turn yourself into a very good English preacher if you serve the mission to inculcate the novel impression of Lord Chaitanya's teachings in the people in general, as well as philosophers and religionists. Abhay at once recognized this to be the same instruction he had received at their first meeting in 1922. He took it as a confirmation. There was now no doubt as to the purpose of his life. What his spiritual master had said in Kolkata in 1922 had not been a chance remark, nor had that been a chance meeting. The instruction was the same. Turn yourself into a very good English preacher. This will do much good to yourself as well as to your audience. End quote. 1922, the very first moment that Srila Prabhupada, our Srila Prabhupada, met Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, the first thing he said before he even got up from offering obeisances, he said, "You're an educated young man, English, you should spread Krishna consciousness in English." This is the very first words he spoke to Srila Prabhupada. And later on it was also confirmed, and now he said it again, just a short while before passing away. This is the next month. He passed away 1 month after this, just about. So 1922. Then in 1922, Prabhupada received this instruction. 50 years later, Srila Prabhupada published his Bhagavad Gita as it is in the English language, 1972. Now it's 50 years after that. What have we got to show? The Gaudiya Math had been given the same instructions that Srila Prabhupada had been given. What instructions have we been given? How well are we following them? How well have we fulfilled them? This is for us to meditate on now that it's 2022. 100 years later. So, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur passed away from the mortal world on January 1st, 1937. He had been spending his last days reading Chaitanya Charitamrita and chanting on his beads. When a doctor had visited him, wanting to give him an injection, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati had protested. "Why are you disturbing me in this way? Simply chant Hare Krishna, that's all." Amongst his last words to his disciples were, quote, "I advise all to preach the teachings of Rupa Raghunath with all energy and resources. Our ultimate goal shall be to become the dust of the lotus feet of Sri Sri Rupa and Raghunath Goswamis. You should all work conjointly under the guidance of your spiritual master with a view to serve the absolute knowledge, the personality of Godhead. You should live somehow or other without any quarrel in this material world, only for the service of Godhead. Do not, please, give up the service of Godhead, in spite of all dangers, all criticisms, and all discomforts. Do not be disappointed, for most people in the world do not serve the personality of Godhead. Do not give up your own service, which is your everything and all. Neither reject the process of chanting and hearing of the transcendental holy name of Godhead. You should always chant the transcendental name of Godhead with patience and forbearance like a tree, and humbleness like a straw. There are many amongst you who are well qualified and able workers. We have no other desire whatsoever." End quote. In his last days, he remained fully conscious and had given instructions until the end. He had specifically and openly ordered that the affairs of his Gaudiya Math be maintained by a 12-man governing body, which the devotees should select amongst themselves. Finally, he had said, "Please accept my blessings to you all, present and absent. Please bear in mind that our sole duty and religion is to spread and propagate service to the Lord and of his devotees." At 5:30 a.m. on January 1st, he breathed his last. Word very soon reached Abhay in Bombay. His immediate response was to cry with grief. No more the joy of an anticipated meeting. No more trips to Calcutta or Vrindavan on the plea of business, just to see the tall, commanding form of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta, the evangelic angel. This sense of never meeting again was difficult to bear. Philosophically, Abhay knew that there was no reason to lament. Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati had come into the world to execute the mission of Lord Chaitanya, and now it was required that he leave this place and go to another, where he would again engage in the same activity. Yet even armed with this philosophy, Abhay felt all alone. His two great well-wishers were gone, his father and now his spiritual master. It will happen to you if it hasn't happened already. It happened to me. Everyone has to undergo these things. Every generation has to undergo the same tests. That's why it's so valuable for us to hear these things. But he felt grateful that he had received a special mercy, a final instruction, just 2 weeks before his spiritual master's departure. Abhay read his letter again and again. There would not be another. The intimate talks and meetings were now gone. But by this letter especially, Abhay would live in the instructions of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati. The letter had come just in time. Now he knew for certain, no matter what anyone else said, how to please his spiritual master and stay linked with Krishna. Following his order, he would conquer the feeling of loss at the disappearance of his most affectionate well-wisher. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Does anyone have any questions or any comments? We can discuss for just whatever few remaining minutes we have. So then, thank you very much for listening patiently. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. Hare Krishna.
Mukunda Prabhu ki
Gaur Bhakta Vrinda ki jai.